Moadim l'simcha and Chag Sameach. Wishing you a joyous final days or hours of Sukkot and Chag Sameach as Shimini Atzeret and Simhat Torah begin. I don't know if you've had a chance to stop by our Shul Sukkah or to see the video that was shared on the Shul's Facebook page last week, the virtual tour of our Shul Sukkah, but I pointed out some of the ways in which the Sukkah this year incorporates various halachic concepts and principles in order to have a sukkah that is kosher and meets all the halachic requirements of a sukkah, but does so in a way that allows for greater airflow and therefore greater COVID safety in this very, hopefully unique Sukkot. And the principles that I described and showed in that video, principle of lavud, principle of good asik, are ways in which halakha allows for certain legal fictions to operate. That if there is a gap of less than 3 tzvachim, of less than 3 hands breadths, then that gap is considered to be non-existent. Those missing spaces, that open air, is halachically considered to be filled in. And so our sukkah wall can be comprised of a lattice, and which allows for air and airflow. A very important safety feature in this year's Sukkot, but halachically it's considered to be a full wall, as though it were a solid wall. That's called lavud. And another principle I discussed was good asik, that once a wall or barrier is 10 tzvachim, 10 hands breadths tall, it's considered to extend all the way up to the sky, even though it doesn't. And so in that way, the wall doesn't have to meet the schach, the covering of the sukkah. There can be a substantial gap once the wall is at least 10 tzvachim tall off the ground. Good asik. And these concepts, lavud, good asik, these are every couple blocks in our community eruv. These concepts are incorporated, and we've used them in our sukkah as well. And I, as of the course of the day, and in conversation with colleagues, and hearing some of their ideas, and experiencing this unusual Sukkot where people are making their way, finding their way to various Sukkot in the neighborhood to avail themselves of the structure for fulfilling the mitzvah, but it's not a Sukkot with hundreds of people packed in together in one giant communal sukkah, or 2 or 3 families crowded around a table in a private family's sukkah. This is a very different kind of Sukkot, a Sukkot with lots of open space. But that's this miracle of this halachic imagination, these legal fictions. Legal fictions are sort of wonderful ways to live. They allow us to exist in one plane of existence, while at the same time experiencing the world with a different plane of existence. So the wall may have a lot of space, but halachically it's a solid wall. There may be a big gap between the wall and the schach and the covering of the sukkah, but halachically that gap isn't there. And there are all sorts of spaces between us right now. There are all sorts of gaps that are keeping us apart this year, these weeks, this Sukkot. But let's realize that actually the care and concern that we feel for one another, the fact that all of us are marking these days of Sukkot, even under very trying circumstances, it's like those gaps aren't there. Okay, let's try to feel that connection that is between us, even when there are big spaces, unfortunately, separating us. And that's really a pivot to Shimini Atzeret and Simhat Torah that are going to be really quite different than anything we've experienced. Simhat Torah, such an important holiday in our community, so much singing and dancing and fun and kiddush, and it's a joyous day, as anyone who's been here or been any other community has surely experienced. And none of that is safe. We can't dance, we can't sing loudly, we can't consume food on shul premises in proximity with other people. It's going to be a very different kind of Simchat Torah. So I want to offer a few ideas of how we might reframe Simchat Torah this year, give us something positive to think about. The first idea is something I heard from Rabbi Yonason Sachs. He's my cousin's rabbi in New Jersey, and he pointed out that the Mishnah at the very end of Masechet Sota lists a kind of decline of the generations. When various rabbis died, there were certain wonderful attributes that they exemplified, which just vanished from the world. And I have, sharing a source sheet, you can see the full Mishnah. You can see list after list. This really sad litany of wonderful things that were just gone from the world when these great rabbis and personalities died, they were the last who exhibited this trait, this positive trait in its fullness. And in the course of this list, there's one trait that appears twice, and that trait is kavod Torah, respect for Torah. When Rabbi Akiva died, the honor of Torah ceased, and also when Gamliel Hazaken died. When Gamliel the elder died, kavod Torah also ceased. So that seems like a contradiction, right? Kavod Torah can only cease once, right? I had a teacher who said, what was it? He was teaching a high school class, and there was a student who wanted to get out of an exam because his some relative had died, and then unfortunately the kid used the same excuse for the same relative twice. Okay, and he said, grandparent, they only die once, so he failed him, as the story goes. But so Kavod Torah seems to have died twice in this litany in the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Sota, when Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken died and Rabbi Akiva died. And Rabbi Sachs, based on Rashi explains that Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, the Kavod Torah that he exemplified in his generation was, up until his time, when people studied Torah, they stood. The Torah was given when we all stood at Sinai and received the Torah. So too, every time we study Torah, that's a reenactment of receiving the Torah at Sinai. We should all stand. That's what we show honor to the Torah. And that was done until the time of Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken. But people, not so vigorous anymore, not so strong anymore after his death, after that change of the generations. And so some aspects of Kavod Torah ceased at the death of Rabbi Gamliel the elder. Rabbi Akiva, different kind of Kavod Torah. He showed honor to the Torah by delving into each and every word, each and every letter. The Gemara tells us Rabbi Akiva darshaned every jot and tittle, every spare mark on the Torah scroll was subject for his interpretive imagination. He derived meaning from seemingly meaningless elements of the Torah, and in that way, he gave great honor to the Torah. This is a text that comes to us from the hands of God. Let's show honor by studying it with such focus and intensity. That's Rabbi Akiva's Kavod Torah. So Kavod Torah, this concept which is at the heart of Simhat Torah, right, where we're supposed to rejoice with the Torah and to give kavod to the Torah. So there are actually two different ways that our tradition teaches this can be done. There's the physical way of showing honor to the Torah, as was exemplified during Gamliel the elder, when people stood for the Torah and used their bodies to show how much respect and love we have for Torah. And then there's the cerebral, intellectual, emotional, passionate honor of Torah shown by Rabbi Akiva's devotion to each and every word, each and every letter, each and every jot and tittle of a letter in the Torah scroll. That's the kind of Kavod Torah. So we can't dance and we can't show honor to the Torah with our bodies this year, but we can certainly show honor to the Torah with our hearts and with our minds. And so I would encourage everyone just to spend a little bit of extra time this Simchat Torah with a sefer, with a book, with a chumash, reading Torah portion, reading any other piece of Torah that is meaningful to you, and in that way show the honor to the Torah that we won't be able to show in our in our bodies through dancing and rejoicing in that way. And one possible thing that you might want to study this Simchat Torah, if you're looking for something to study, would be the passages of the Torah, the parshiot that we had to skip this year. We had to close our shul, as you may remember, in March, and the end of Sefer Shemot, the end of the book of Exodus, we never got to read together in shul. The entirety of the book of Leviticus, we didn't get to read together in shul. Most of the book of Numbers, we didn't get to read together in shul. For all of those weeks that our shul was closed down, these parshiot were never heard in our community. And I think what a wonderful way to show honor to the Torah than by trying to catch up and reading some of those missed parshiot. And this leads me to another idea that I heard from Rabbi Aaron Ross, who is an old friend and he's a colleague. He is an administrator at a Jewish school in New Jersey, and he pointed out that from one perspective, we don't deserve a Simchat Torah this year because we didn't actually complete the Torah, right? Walk up to a man in the street, say, tell me what Simchat Torah is about, and they'll tell you, Simchat Torah is the rejoicing at the completion of the Torah. We completed the annual cycle of Torah portions on Simchat Torah, but we didn't do that this year. So maybe we don't deserve to celebrate. because we missed all of those parsha, all those weeks that the shul was closed. And he suggests, and I think he's correct, that the rejoicing of Simchat Torah is not the rejoicing of completion. For were that the case, we would not deserve to rejoice. We would have no occasion to rejoice this year. It's the rejoicing from starting anew. And that we are going to do this year. So Simchat Torah, especially this year, perhaps every year, is the holiday, is the day in which we feel great happiness and great joy, not because of what we've accomplished, but because of what we are about to begin. And this year, we're going to begin. Thank God we're healthy enough and things are safe enough that with masks and distancing, we're going to be able to start the Torah again. And with all of our diligence and our care and meticulous compliance with health guidelines and a lot of siyata d'shmaya, a lot of help from God, may we also merit not only starting, but finishing the Torah this year. And so that's a reason to celebrate, that's a reason to feel joy, and we'll just channel that joy, okay, in directions that are not going to be with dancing and not going to be with loud singing, but can be with our hearts and with our minds, that can be poured our attention and our love and our honor to the Torah. I wish you all a Chag Sameach. I look forward to seeing many of you at 540 West Melrose on our campus, perhaps walking the sidewalks of our neighborhood in the coming days, perhaps on a Zoom call for a shiur or some other event in the coming weeks, or in a phone call in any other venue. I wish you all a Chag Sameach and be well.